This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from Open LMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And Open LMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hi there, I'm Ladek. This episode is part of a live, real-time series that I recorded at the 2022 EDUCAUSE conference in Denver, Colorado. In this conversation, I speak with Brendan Aldrich from Invoke Learning and the Higer Ed podcast about data lakes, warehouses, and what can be done about making data for decisions in higher ed more accessible. And just a quick reminder, you can make sure to never miss an episode of the podcast by subscribing at elearnmagazine.com. Now, I give you Brendan Aldrich.
Mr. Aldrich.
Yes, Brendan.
Brendan. You are from Invoke Learning?
Yes.
You're here at EDUCAUSE. You've actually been running around podcasting yourself, I think. Did you?
Yes.
You pull it off or no?
I am now the host of the Higer Ed.
Okay.
A Higer Ed podcast about the voices of higher education.
Okay. So I know you and I connected on this, like a week or so ago.
Right.
You've got 8 or 10 episodes out right now?
About 9 or 10 episodes now.
Okay. So tell us, what's the... I want to start there. What is the focus, the point of the podcast? Tell me, like, some of the guests that you've had on.
I actually spent about 10 years working in higher education before forming Invoke Learning. So I was at City Colleges of Chicago. I became the chief data officer for Ivy Tech, the statewide community college in Indiana, and then was even the chief data officer for the California State University system.
Okay.
But I always took a very grassroots approach to the work that I did. So I was always out at campuses. I was talking to all these different groups of people and realized that I had a perspective and a better understanding of sort of what everybody did and how that contributed to higher education than many other people did whose roles were maybe a little bit more focused. Mm-hmm. So with the podcast, I wanted to bring that experience to anybody who wanted to listen. Let's bring in college presidents and chancellors and CIOs and institutional researchers and directors of advancement, and really have a chance to spend 20 or 30 minutes with each of these people and learn more about them and who they are and how their work contributes to supporting students in higher education.
100%. So who's been your favorite guest so far? Actually, you were telling me about one last
Honestly,
Thursday.
we had a recent episode that came out with Olivia Q. Fickus, who is the chief data officer at Vanderbilt University. Mm-hmm. Which was great because, among other things, Vanderbilt University is where all of the mRNA research back in the 90s started that wound up becoming the basis for many of the COVID vaccines during the pandemic.
Wow.
And Olivia herself started her career in international development, actually working in Ukraine. And we talked a little bit about that during the episode as well. So I think overall, just a great episode that not only helped develop a better understanding of her role as a chief data officer, but also was able to bring in some current events and some perspectives and topics on things that are happening right now.
Awesome. Fantastic. So what, if you're going to get something out of EDUCAUSE, actually, I want to hear the perspective. Like, you've been in this business forever, and you've been to EDUCAUSE multiple times. What's this year like compared to, obviously, the last couple of years have been nothing, but does it feel like there's something new? Is there a new energy here? Is there, like, a restart? Or is this like we've picked up where we've left off?
I think the momentum is building. Obviously, during the pandemic, we couldn't really do everything that we used to when it came to the annual conference and bringing. There were sometimes 8,000 or 9,000 people that would come to an EDUCAUSE conference.
And what's this year, like 3,000?
No. Well, actually, last year was the first year EDUCAUSE came back after the pandemic, and it was a smaller, more intimate EDUCAUSE involving maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people.
Okay.
This year, I believe there's about 5,000 people, so it really is building and recovering back to the place where EDUCAUSE used to be that we all remember and love about EDUCAUSE. Mm-hmm.
You got muted. Now we're back muted, sir.
Do we know where we left off?
Chris, where did you lose us? Did you hear about Innovative Learning? Innovative Learning? Invoke Learning. Okay, so let's start with Invoke Learning. So, small startup company.
Small startup company. We've been building products and platforms for about 4 years now. We're working with about 24 different colleges today. And what we're doing is, first of all, delivering a replacement to traditional data warehouses. Okay, data warehouses have been around for over 35 years, but they can be expensive. They're challenging to work with. They're difficult to extend with more data. And so the very first thing we did is we created a new approach to data warehousing that we call a data lakehouse. Okay, and it's all the best capabilities of a data lake and a data warehouse, specifically tailored for higher education, but done in a way that is very affordable. It gets up and running fast. It can be up and running as quickly as 5 weeks for many colleges, and really does a lot more than any traditional data warehouse is currently capable of doing. So it really does empower the colleges to really think about now, how do we want to take what we used to think we could do with data and just take it to a completely different place.
So what is, for most people, it's they're not going to understand the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake, right? So data lake house. So what are the fundamental differences there in terms of what does a warehouse do that a lake can do, or vice versa?
So there are some. We'll talk about it from the standpoint of capabilities. So one of the problems with data warehousing is that it really encompasses just a little bit of data that an institution depends on, usually from just one or two key systems like the student information system or the learning management system. Almost never includes any public data, so we really don't understand that whole dynamic of students about the environments they live in and how that may affect their academic performance. And there's all these other systems that colleges use and depend on that never get used in any analytics. It could be card swipe systems, housing systems, it could be student success systems. But really, the first thing a data lakehouse does is it lets us really onboard data from all of the different systems that a college can use by bringing all of those key tables in, snapshotting them every day, and creating a level of historical stability for all of those source systems that just doesn't exist today. The second thing is we then take all that data and we roll it up into a warehouse. But unlike any other warehouse people have ever seen before, because that just a student warehouse can be like 100 tables. You have to learn how to join and navigate and work with in order to build reports and do analytics. We've actually taken advantage of a number of cloud capabilities to really rethink this. So we've actually folded all those dimensional tables back down to the key fact tables. So we're presenting an entire multi-source warehouse to colleges around students that are represented in 5 tables that require no joins, and really running a query. If you wanted to run a query that says, show me students that are under a 3.1 GPA, who are, we create a metric called the engagement metric, who are under a certain engagement score, let's say of 0.4, who do at least 10% of their work in the LMS after 8 o'clock at night, and who live in neighborhoods with elevated levels of unemployment. I mean, that is like an impossible query for most data warehouses.
The last one, the geo specificity, and you're pulling that from a public data set? Or
okay. We bring in data, and we enrich the data for the colleges automatically from like the U.S. Census Bureau, the National Institute of Health, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, all of that automatically. So you can run a query like that off of our data lakehouse platform, and it's nothing but select this data from this table, where and group by and order by, and you're done. So that's what I mean by really empowering.
Spoken like a man who's done his fair share of SQL queries.
A fair bit, and which is, SQL can be. Funny enough, my wife, who was a Pete's ICU nurse when we met, and then developed her career in medical device, but then went back to school to get her medical informatics degree, so to get into the world of data that I've been doing, but instead doing for higher education, doing that kind of work in the medical industry. And by far, she said, for her own experience, the hardest course she took was her SQL course.
Oh, you can see from the gray hair. I've been around SQL for a long time. It's just one of those. There are magicians, and then there's people who know SQL. It's crazy.
So, but really, at its core, all the technology is meant just to serve the institution so that it can better help understand and help support their students and operations.
Okay, cool. So, at EDUCAUSE 2022. We've come out of the pandemic. I'm calling it. We've come out of the pandemic. institutions are rethinking who they are. We just had some people on earlier today talking about diversity and inclusion. We had another person talk about wrangling the cloud. We had another person talking about what it's like to be a young professional. What do you see as maybe the 2 or 3 most critical things for higher education today, as it's kind of rethinking who it is or what it is as a sector?
Well, as we're coming out of the pandemic, the critical things that every college is focused on right now is enrollment and retention. Whether you're an institution that was very well supported because you had a lot of students that wanted to attend, so you didn't really feel that pinch, or you felt it dramatically. We have schools that dropped 30-50% enrollment over the course of the pandemic. There was an expectation that maybe these students would come back now that these schools were returning to more online, normalized classes, on premise again. And it's not happening. We're not seeing the kids coming back. We're not seeing the students re-engaging. And in fact,
I think even EDUCAUSE just published something like a week and a half ago. It says the demand still through their hybrid or online is increasing, even though all we heard over the pandemic was we want to get back in the classroom.
And even the students that are returning on-prem are finding, especially if those institutions are further away from home, that they're wanting to come back and go to schools that are closer to home again.
Interesting.
I think, to your point, primarily just so that they can be closer if they're going to be on-prem, but because online has become something that people have not only, I think, started to adapt to, but to really embrace on a much wider scale than we had before the pandemic.
So how is something like EDUCAUSE, like the technologies that we see around us, how are they helping those institutions to evolve? Like, are we seeing leaders and those that aren't sort of keeping up pace? Is there a true evolution that we're going to be seeing in higher education over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I had an old boss of mine who used to use a phrase, is this a solution looking for a problem? And there's a little bit of that when you get into the technology space where you have these really interesting technologies and capabilities. But are they really solving a problem that needs solving? Or are they interesting and cool for the sake of being interesting and cool? And I think that's really what colleges are navigating right now, is there's all of this capability that's available. And I think colleges have learned by the transition to online at the beginning of the pandemic that their technology teams are maybe much more involved, capable, and present than they ever expected them to be. Right. And that these are people they can depend on to bring technologies in. We just need to make sure, and I say we as colleges, need to make sure that these are technologies that are solving problems that currently exist, as opposed to being interesting and cool for the sake of being interesting.
How has that changed? I think, I'm going to be talking with, I believe his name is Noah Gaia, if you remember that name. And one of the questions he posed out there was bringing that tech team to the table on RFPs on these problem solving sooner. Do you think that that's been happening in more and more institutions? Has that team evolved? I'm thinking again about the guest that we had earlier today. She was talking about North Carolina State University, and she said, we were 10 years back already when the pandemic, and now we've had the leapfrog. It's been a complete rethink at that university. How do you think this has changed?
No, I think so. Yeah, and I'm gonna do an analogous kind of story to this, because there's a lot of similarity to this situation about colleges trying to involve IT and technology earlier that there is when you talk about data. In a lot of cases, in any organization, what happens is when people start to get worried about problems with their data, it's because they'll generally see something in a report and they'll say, my report is wrong.
Right.
But oftentimes, the report never changed.
No, I mean, the report is just the algorithm that is being spit out by the computer.
Correct.
Right?
But a lot of times it's because operationally at the front end, we've maybe changed something about the way we're capturing data or what we're doing and how we're processing it. So, but you don't see it until it gets to the very end. And that's a lot of cases, like IT was never involved until the very end in many cases.
Right.
So in a lot of cases, it used to be like the old phrase, the tail wagging the dog. You have to go investigate up the chain to find out what happened and how to accommodate that so that the college could, from a technology standpoint, continue to move forward. So I agree with you, though. I think that many colleges are now really looking at how they involve their IT teams in a lot of these challenges that they typically had brought to IT only after they decided what they were doing.
So if we're living, we're living in this place where you kind of mentioned, is this a problem in search of a solution? I went to HR Tech 3 weeks ago, I don't know, like a month ago.
Yep.
One of the things that I came out of HR Tech with, and it's very related to higher ed, just because it's human, right? Is that AI is everywhere, and it seems to be this accepted thing. Because on every booth, it was AI this, AI that. I want to know, are the solutions that we've found in higher ed much more simple? Again, referring back to our colleague from North Carolina State, just changing their ticketing system, from like a manual process to something that's automated. Things that probably you and I would think these are pretty simple deals. Is that what we need in higher ed right now, or is?
So AI is such an umbrella term to talk about a lot of different types of technologies. Whether you're talking about a chat bot that's helping to respond to students in real time, for example, all the way to, and we do have some AI-enhanced applications, deep analytic applications, where we're using AI to really dive through all of that data that we're bringing to the table and help colleges better understand, for example, what are the behaviors, what are the descriptors that are involved when you look at a certain group and try to understand why aren't they enrolled, why aren't they coming back, so that you can really focus that research time and stop sort of going down all the different rabbit holes that sometimes we're asked to go down, and really be able to come back to the table and say, actually, if we want to understand why we're not seeing enrollment from this type of student, it's because of this. Now, that last part is the part AI can't do, but yet everybody's a little bit worried about, is that idea that AI is somehow going to replace me as a person, right? And the need for me to do this job. Now, AI, I will tell you, is nowhere near there. You'll have companies that will tell you, my AI will tell you what to do, but what we have to understand is those AIs are being trained by other colleges that organization is working with that might not look like you. Right? Sure. Is a piece of advice that was implemented and successful for a 4-year university in Florida going to be just as applicable to an inner city community college, right? In Los Angeles? Probably not. And so I think that's one of the dangers when we try to replace that human element. Is let's involve AI to the point of empowering people to best do what we do, which is to engage, support, and advise.
Can you go one step further there as well? Is that because one of the things that I found in the AI conversation is that we want to erase the messiness of being a human, and I feel like it always comes back to the Spock-Kirk conversation, right? That's the beauty of being human. Can you dive any deeper there? Like I've heard conversations around like entrance essays, for example, are being scanned and being machine read, and they're just like kind of looking for variables in language, right? So like how deep is your vocabulary essentially? Right. Which really doesn't speak to, does this person have an original thought? It's just looking for vocabulary.
That's right. And there's been a lot of leap and bound progress when it comes to moving beyond natural language processing into what they call natural language understanding. Right. The idea that you can feed in the text of Moby Dick and have an AI spit out a half-page synopsis. Right. So there's work that is going on in that direction, but I think you have a valid point. There's a difference between understanding and judging, right? Evaluating. And I think that's where people step in to say, you know what, this is an interesting turn of phrase. This is an interesting thought that's being presented. And that's really something that an AI is going to have a lot of difficulty learning how to do.
So as someone in the data business, talk to me about your top 2 or 3 challenges that most higher education institutions have. When getting over that barrier, is it just taking the deep breath and making, signing the check and saying, okay, we're ready to do this? Is it making sure the right stakeholders are at the table? Is it what are those challenges to kind of leap into that?
I'm going to tackle this from a little bit of a different direction. So when I began working at Ivy Tech, that's where I met my partner in Invoke Learning, Lige Henson. Okay. And Lige, for the 2 years before I'd arrived, had been doing really some of the most innovative work, architecturally speaking, around data that I'd ever come across. And as he and I talked, we began bouncing ideas off of each other, and we realized that if we weren't working in higher education, you only really needed to come up with an idea that was one of 3 things. That it would either be better, faster, or more flexible than whatever it was that we were doing today. Okay? But in higher education, especially at the community college where we were working, we realized that to do something new, it had to be 5 things. It had to be all 5. It had to be faster. It had to be more flexible. It had to be, better. But it also had to cost next to nothing, and it had to require almost nobody to build and support it. Now, as impossible as that seems, we would keep batting things around until we came up with ideas that sort of fit what we called the Magic Five. Right. Okay? And all the work that we did, which ended up winning a couple of international awards at Ivy Tech, were all different combinations of these Magic Five ideas. Okay? And even the work we're doing today at Invoke Learning is, again, more combinations of these Magic Five ideas that's enabling us to really build solutions that address a lot of the problems that colleges have when it comes to either working with data warehouses, onboarding enough data to better understand their students, or working with that data, understanding what those students really need to be supported effectively.
So I'm going to end with this question. I don't know what it could possibly be, but what are you excited about for not this school year, but the next one? You know, and when we get into next year and people are starting their planning processes, they're doing budgeting right now. What gets you excited? Is there some new shiny object? Is it a consortium that's coming together? Is there a new conversation? Is there a gelling around an idea?
No, I think what really excites me about the stage that we're in, and I know a lot of people talk about this return to a new normal, as though somehow calling it a new normal doesn't mean that it's not something completely different from the old normal.
I always thought that, for me, that's how the definition is that the new normal is that
that's right.
We've evolved. We've stepped up.
We are now in a really exciting time in higher education, where higher education has been given this opportunity to really rethink the way that it operates and the way that it works with and supports students. And I think as we're coming out of that, we're trying to return back to on-premise learning. We're trying to see how that works. How do we blend on-premise and distance or online learning? How are these working with students? How are students reacting? Are these what do we need to do? How do we reinvent ourselves as institutions in order to become higher education of the future?
Brendan Aldrich, Invoke Learning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak up.
I appreciate it.
I don't know, you're not giving a presentation?
No, but anybody that'd like to learn more, they can go to invokelearning.com in order to learn about the work that we're doing there, or they can turn into my podcast at
The Higer Ed.
Right
here, you can see it right here,
thehigeredge.com.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.